For the past couple of weeks, the talk has been around the possibility that the Big 12 could use private equity money to bring Florida State and Clemson into the Big 12 if and when they leave the ACC. In a recent interview, did West Virginia's athletic director, Wren Baker, drop some subtle hints as to whether or not that could actually happen? We're going to talk about that, and we're going to do it right after this word from our sponsor. Since 1931, the attorneys at Katz, Cantor, Stone Street, and Buckner have been the voice for victims who have suffered serious injury or death. They have a fierce passion for truth and justice and a sincere compassion for those who have been wronged by others. Whether you have been in a car accident or fighting with an insurance company, or you or a loved one has suffered serious injury or death due to medical negligence, we will ensure your voice is heard loud and clear. Katz, Cantor, Stone Street, and Buckner will ensure there is justice for all West Virginians because we are your lawyer. Your voice. Visit us at yourlawyeryourvoice.com. What is up? Welcome in. Come on in and make yourself comfortable. Belly yourself up to the bar and let me pour you out another shot of top shelf college football content. On tap in this episode, we're talking about the Big 12 potentially bringing Florida State and Clemson into the conference and using private equity money to do so. Well, Wren Baker, West Virginia's AD, was recently on an episode of Three Guys Before the Game. It's a very popular West Virginia sports podcast, for those of you who aren't familiar with it. And he was asked some questions very directly about some of these topics, and this one specifically, both about Florida State and Clemson rumor and about private equity. I'm going to play a couple snippets from this interview with Wren, give you my thoughts on it and how that ties in to the story. So let's go ahead and share the first clip or the first snippet from the clip right now.
So, Wren, fans get really amped up when people like Ross Dellinger float stories out there and say, hey, Clemson, Florida State, da, 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 da. What's your message to Mountaineer Nation when they see said stories about more tremors of movement?
Well, it's kind of like, remember I was flying with a donor one time, and this donor was talking about betting on games.
Oh, boy.
And I said, listen, knowing everything I know, having watched our team practice, having asked our coaches how we match up, all of this information, maybe once or twice would I see a line over the course of a year, all sports combined, and think, something doesn't look right there. Trying to talk this distinguished gentleman out of gambling. And the guy didn't bat an eye and said, I need you to call me when those two lines come up. So you can never in college athletics predict what would happen. But I would say of the things that are out there in the universe of consumption, and I see a lot of them too, most of the time when I'm reading that, it's news to me. And if it's news to me, that probably means there's not a lot of accuracy to it. What we do know is that there are definitely institutions positioning and jockeying to try and put themselves in the best position. There is a lot of pressure to grow revenue. But I would just caution people to realize that a lot of times what they're seeing is the tip of the iceberg, and the tip they're seeing is probably not the most accurate and real information.
So in the words of Wren Baker, if I see it the same time the fans see it, then more than likely there's not a lot of truth to it. Because I'm going to know, and he gave the example of flying with a donor to prove, hey, I'm the AD. I'm going to know things before fans know it, or even before donors know it, right? Now, he didn't specifically mention the Florida State Clemson piece, but that's what he was asked about. Now, the first time I watched this video last week while I was enjoying vacation with my family, I came away from it thinking, you know what, Wren Baker didn't give any specifics. He could be talking in generalities here about what's going on out there in the Twitterverse, about conference realignment as a whole. So I didn't put any weight on that. He's just dodging the question because he doesn't want to. He can't talk about Florida State and Clemson because it could breach, potentially cross tortious interference or cause people to accuse him of things or accuse the Big 12 things, whatever. He's just trying to dodge the question. Then I watched it back again while preparing for this video, and I came away with a totally different mindset. I actually think Wren Baker is telling us there in that comment, without directly telling us, saying, hey, Matter of fact, pay attention to what he did not say, right? Along with what he said. But I think he's subtly telling us there that I have not heard this. So more than likely that there's no accuracy to it. And then he talked about how institutions are jockeying for position, trying to increase revenues. Is it possible that Florida State could have had that leaked out in order to send a message to the Big Ten or the SEC? Is that possible? It's also possible that the Big 12 could have had it leaked to show that they're jockeying for position to try to claim the big prizes of Florida State and Clemson if and when they leave the ACC. So there's two different – I want to know what you guys think from that. Did you think he was just talking in generalities and didn't want to get into specifics to avoid tortious interference? Or do you think he really meant, hey, there's nothing to this story right now? If there were, I'm the AD of one of the Big 12 teams. I would know about it. Don't pay any attention to it. Now, when it comes to and we all know, or most of us do anyway, that, or at least the talk has been, I don't want to say we know, but the talk, it's believed that the only way the Big 12 can entice schools like Clemson or Florida State, or really any ACC school, unless they get stuck with no other option, the only way they would be able to entice them at all would be to the use of private equity money, because we all know the Big 12's TV revenue is at best equal to the ACC's, if not a little under the ACC right now. So why in the world would a school go through courts, spend all this time and legal money to try to get out of the ACC to make the same or less money in the Big 12? It doesn't make any sense, right? But you use private equity money, use that to entice them in and increase their revenue somehow there. That's kind of been the talk, because we've heard the reports that the Big 12 has talked with private equity. There was a report came out, I think it was by Ross Dellinger, talked about CVC partners, talked about how there was pushback in the league by some presidents, but the Big 12 is exploring it. Brett Yormark has admitted kicking the tires on private equity because they'd be dumb not to, essentially. Well, Wren Baker was asked this as well in this same interview by these guys at Three Guys, and I'm going to share the next snippet with you about that, and then we'll talk about the private equity piece specifically.
Do you think within the next 24 months, a school or one of the major conferences does some form of venture capital?
I don't think a conference as a whole will, although, they could. I mean, certainly that's something you have an obligation to explore it. But when you talk about a conference, you're talking about most of them would require a 3/4 vote, I think, to do something like that, because you're really you're selling a stake of the league.
Mm-hmm.
And so getting 3/4 of a very, like, you look at our membership now, it just like that's going to require some lifting. Could it happen? Yes. Would I put a timeline as short as 24 months on it? I'm not sure. Now, I do think an individual institution could certainly do that. When it comes to individual institutions, you really can't sell a part of your athletic program. What you could do is park some of your external revenues in a third party and sell ownership or have a partnership in that third party. We do that to a certain extent with our multimedia rights in Learfield. And so, that's something that could happen. But private equity, venture capital only gets into businesses to make money. So you'd have to be convinced that the net of that would be enough that everybody wins to do that. And so there'd have to be a lot of legwork done.
All right. So a lot of legwork would need to be done in order to make something like private equity happen at the conference level. And he doesn't seem to think any conference will bring in private equity in the next 24 months. Now, there was a long pause before he answered it, which is for obvious reasons. He's trying to make sure he doesn't say anything he shouldn't. And he didn't rule it out. He said it could happen, but I wouldn't put a 24-month time frame on it. So it sounds to me like Wren Baker thinks that, yes, down the road it probably will, but not right now. And it seems to me like his reasoning is because he doesn't seem to think you could get 3/4 of the members in the conference to agree to it. He talked about how you need 3/4 of the members to vote yes to do it, and how it would be hard to do that with 16 teams in the league. It'd be heavy lifting, you know, and we, in the Ross Dellinger article I mentioned earlier, Ross mentioned that the Big 12 is getting pushback from some presidents on using private equity for a couple of different reasons. One, you'd have to sell off a share of the conference. Two, private equity groups would likely want you to sign an extended grant of rights, and we all know what that has caused in the ACC. Probably not a great idea to do it. So Wren seems to be echoing that sentiment that, hey, getting 3/4 of these schools to agree on private equity in the next 2 years, likely not going to happen. But he did not rule it out. He did not rule it out. So does that mean the Big 12 is going to land Florida State and Clemson with the use of private equity money? I think the answer to that is a very unlikely no. But I do think it's still possible. I think the Big 12 will do everything it can to try to be an attractive conference to those schools when they finally get out, or at least know that they can get out of the ACC. Right now, they can't have one-on-one conversations. They can't have direct conversations. Once there's more clarity on what happens with the court cases, with the grant of rights and all that, then they can have more serious talks. And then maybe the conversations heat up about the private equity conversation as well. Maybe that's what, and maybe Wren just doesn't think it'll happen within that time frame, because we saw Pete Thamel put out today confirming basically that what most of us believed, that, hey, Florida State and Clemson are not announcing they're leaving the ACC before August 15th of this year, which means they will at least have to play in that conference for 2 more seasons, 24 and 25. That gets to that 24-month time frame potentially that Wren's, that Wren's answer was based on here. So maybe then the Big 12 uses private equity, and maybe then you can start having more serious talks about that when there's actually a team to go out and get or entice to bring in or whatever. But I want you to let me know what you think. Does this rule out the Big 12 bringing them in? I don't think it rules it out, but I do think we need to pump the brakes a little bit on something happening so really fast. I think it'll be a couple more years probably before we know anything about whether the Big 12 does have a shot at those 2 schools or not, realistically. Right now, I would say it's a very, very slim chance. I think obviously the SEC would be my guess on where Clemson and Florida State land, with Big 10 being probably option 2. And then thirdly, I think there's actually an option on the table for them to go independent. And there's probably other options out there too. I think the Big 12 would probably be the least likely scenario for Florida State and Clemson, and would only happen if those 2 schools end up getting stuck with no other options. And to me, if they see that's going to happen, I don't think they leave the ACC, because they're not going to want to make a move to the Big 12 without knowing for sure they're going to make a lot more money. Now, it doesn't mean other schools can't leave the ACC for the Big 12, but I don't think those 2 brands would, without some level of certainty they're going to be able to make something close to the Big 10 and SEC schools. But anyway, I want to know what you think. Do you think Wren Baker told us in a sort of way here, hey, it's not happening, folks, don't get your hopes up? Or do you think he's just having to speak in generalities to avoid giving away too much? I want to hear what you think. Let me know in the comments section. Also want to give a VIP member shout out of this episode. I forgot to read these people's names off the last show, so I decided to put their names up again, but it's FSU 45, Tax Sprint 99, Go Blue Michigan, who's a brand new member here. Thank you for joining the channel, becoming a VIP member here at Couz's Corner. If you want to join that club, hit the join button below, sign up for one of the 2 levels, enjoy the perks that go along with them. If you can't find a join button, go to my homepage. There's one right beside my profile photo. Also, I have a merch store. I haven't been promoting my merch store a lot, but I have a lot of cool merch over there. T-shirts, coffee mugs, hoodies, all kinds of different things, ball caps. Go get yourself some merch, several different designs to choose from. There's also other ways you can support my show financially in the description box, or you can support me 100% absolute free by hitting the like button. It really helps the YouTube algorithm. You can subscribe to the channel, help me get to 10,000 subscribers. You can share it with your family and friends. And last but not least, the comment. Drop that comment below that I mentioned earlier. That also feeds that YouTube algorithm. I want to remind you that there are other videos you can check out, including the one right here in the corner of your screen. I appreciate you tuning into this episode. Have a top shelf day, and cue country roads.